Zimzum. Have you heard the word before? Look, I've mentioned this word to a few people as I was thinking about writing about this topic, and they go, "What's Zimzum?" So I hope that in this post you'll get to learn a little bit and understanding about what Zimzum is. Look, I've always been puzzled about how the voluntary creating of space for another person has kind of a deep effect on them, especially if they've experienced trauma. It's like a welcoming of the lost and the broken and the hurt can so often create feelings of puzzlement in them. And openness triggers curiosity, then possibly some hope, or maybe even fear. And in them, they start to say, "Is this real? Can this be true? What's the catch? Where's the catch? When will it be taken away from me?" And if you've been kind of homeless, as sense, um, the warmth and welcome of a secure place can bring relief and possibly an all consuming desire for more. More of this feeling of being loved, held, and known. And to those who have been abused when an invader has crossed over one's sovereignty and stolen from you, then the experience of welcoming in warts and all of yourself can seemingly cut right across the old message of that you've adopted of being worthless. And I think it's that taste of Zimzum, which we're going to talk about next, that is experienced. So what is Zimzum? Well, here we go. In the 16th century, there was this leading rabbi and Jewish mystic called by the name of Isaac Luria, who put together and postulated a doctrine about God. And another writer, more recent, he writes us about Zimzum. The Hebrew word Zimzum can mean contraction, retraction, demarcation, restraint, and concentration. The term Zimzum originates in the Kabbalah and refers to God's contraction of himself before the creation of the world and for the purpose of creating the world. To put it in another way, the omnipresent God who exists beyond time and space before creation withdraws a part of his infinite presence into himself. And I like to think, just takes a little back in. All right. With this divine gesture, God restricts himself in Zimzum, clearing the empty space that is necessary for creation. The emanation and the creation of the world are then able to occur in the center of God following this act of Zimzum. In this process, God limits his omnipotence, omnipotence, so that a finite world can exist within the finite contours. Without Zimzum, there would be no creation. And that comes from Christoph Schult. And I really like that last sentence. Without Zimzum, there would be no creation. Listen to that. Without Zimzum, there would be no creation. And God contracts, God withdraws, God limits God's self so that creation, including us, can exist. It's making space for the other, a vulnerable space. Another explanation comes from Rob Bell. Zimzum is a Hebrew word used in the rabbinic tradition to talk about the creation of the world, not in a scientific way, but more like something between poetry and metaphysical speculation. Okay, so it's really up there. Um, Followers of this tradition began with the assumption that before there was anything, there was only God. The divine, they believe, was all that was. For something to exist other than God, then God had to create space that wasn't God. Okay, it's a bit esoteric, but stay with me. That's Rob. Their contention was that for something to exist that wasn't God, God had to contract or withdraw from a certain space so that something else, something other than God, could exist and thrive in that space. And the word they used for this divine contraction is Zimzum. God zimzums so that everything we know to be everything can exist and thrive. So that's Rob Bell and Kristen Bell's wife. Look, I know this is kind of a big and out of the normal kind of Sunday morning service content, but I think this is hugely important. And I always like to try and find biblical narratives, particularly from Jesus, to kind of to describe these concepts. So, in the story of the dehumanized man or the Good Samaritan, the Samaritan retracts himself away from the path and opens space in his life for the needs of the traumatized and dehumanized man. Okay, and if you want to read that story, there's a link in the blog post. And in the story of the loving father, aka the prodigal son, the father creates space and throws open wide, welcoming Zimzum arms to a returning wayward son. Okay, in the story of the Good Samaritan, the Samaritan also, what does he give? Oil and wine. So there's giving. In the story of the prodigal son, there's robes and rings and sandals. So there's a giving into the space that's been created for the other. So, and when Jesus washes the dusty feet of his disciples, that's a taste of Zimzum. It's making space. It's saying, I'm making space for you to come in. And it really challenges the belief that the human belief that love must be earned, that grace is based on our behaviour and getting things right. How often have you shown love to others, created space for them, and they have taken advantage of this kindness? Have they robbed something of you? Possibly the Zimzum has been misconstrued. You turn the other cheek, and then they punch you in the gut. So you close up. Your boundaries go from thin to thick. But the thing is, God continues to Zimzum. God does perfectly what we cannot. We continue to offer a droplet taste of Zimzum to others. We do what we can do, and we open a little vulnerable space to a few others, and the angels sing. I've got lots more quotes that might help explain Zimzum in the blog post. There's a link below in the show notes that I'd love you to come over and have a read. And email me, talk to me about this topic. I think it's vitally important, especially in helping people who have been traumatized, because it just is the opposite to traumas and to abuse. It's the welcoming in, it's the vulnerability that helps people the most to say, you are welcome here. Okay, thanks.